Welcome to the Speckled Truth Podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, I want to welcome you back to the Speckled Truth Podcast. Here with, to be quite honest with you, again, another very surreal moment, and I've had a chance to talk to Mike a lot and know him over the course of the years. And to be honest, he is my fishing mentor, whether he likes it or not. And I know he's giggling, but I'm here with Captain Mike McBride down here in Port Mansfield, Texas, with my trout fishing mentor. Mike, welcome to the show.
Oh, good grief, Chris. Well, welcome. Glad you can make it down to Port Mansfield town. I guess we've got a lot to talk about. I'm not sure where we're going with this, so just leave me and I'll try to follow you.
You got it, Mike. Well, so for our followers that we have out there from Virginia to Texas, obviously known here in Texas, and you're going to punch me in the face after this, but as a trout fishing legend here. And so, but for those that aren't familiar with Mike, why don't you go ahead and tell them a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself. Oh, good heavens. Well, my claim to fame, I guess, is I just like to fish for trout and did quite a bit of it. Not as much as others, but more than a lot. No, I grew up in Kingsville. I'm south of the Nueces River, so I'm a South Texas boy. And done a lot of things and just decided at one point in my life, well, I've got such a passion here. Let's go ahead and dive in and do it professionally. So I did, and been in pursuit of the best fish that we could catch for a long time. It's an interesting pursuit. I've learned a lot, not only about fishing, but about life in general doing this, and met a lot of great people, and Chris is one of them. And there's not much to tell about me. I'm just here and have a few fish stories to tell, I guess. That's about it on me.
Yeah. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about, though. So, born and raised in Kingsville.
Yes, sir.
Trophy, now obviously one of the Mike McTrout McBride. And so tell us a little bit about, though, when were you first interested in targeting trout? And is that something you've always just pursued over the course of your angling career?
No, we started off, when we were kids, 4 and 5 years old, and your mother would take you out to the King Ranch Pond. You'd perch jerk, and catch catfish on worms. And then we started doing, and then we went to the creeks up there. Our parents, and that was in the old days when you could still do this. Your parents would drop you off at a creek on the highway, and with a little lunchbox and a thermos, when you're 8, 9 years old, you'd stay there all day long. So we went through that progression, but we moved from cactus and horny toads in Kingsville to Portland, Texas, my freshman year of high school. And I lived a half a block from the bay, and went, oh, wow, what a new ecosystem this is. And I went out there and walked out there with an old redfin one day, and I caught a big trout. What I thought was a big trout. It was about 22 inches. To me, it was huge. And so that started kind of fueling a passion, and you just, went from there, a little more. I think there's an old adage out there that when you first start fishing, you want to catch the most fish that you can. And as you progress, you want to catch the biggest fish you can. As you progress even more, you want to catch the most elusive. And I think I went down that path. And ever since then, I've tried to put all the sciences together and get out there and try to pattern these bigger fish. They don't leave tracks like deer. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to this. What I do want to say, getting off of me, I want to talk about you, Chris. This Dirty 30 Club that you're doing, I think it's remarkable. You're recruiting a lot of new anglers that have more respect for the environment, more respect for what's out there. And what I want you Dirty 30 boys to understand is we get a lot of information, and we've seen all the gillnet studies, and a true 30-inch trout is less than 0.5% of the entire population.
My God.
So when y'all, turn your stuff in and get your Dirty 30 sticker, you've done a remarkable thing statistically. And there's two ways to do this. You can catch them by accident, or you can get out there and learn the fishery and try to catch them on purpose. And that's what we've tried to do. And that's, to me, that's the whole game is trying to understand your quarry and getting out there and patting them and catching one on purpose. But I think that your program is exceptional. We just don't have a lot of people these days that are preaching. I use the word preaching, but are promoting responsible use. And I think you're doing a great job, and you're getting a lot of traction from a lot of great people. And I think it's just going to continue.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. No, I appreciate it. So let's stay on that though. So with purpose, right? And that's something that we do here at Speckled Truth is a lot of the content we share, and that's actually part of our mission statement, is actually developing as an angler and then growing as a sportsman, right? And that developing as an angling component to that is understanding the nuances that are basically associated with targeting big fish. And so is there an approach that you use? Is there something that you do that basically increases the odds, right, to developing as an angler? So you talked about catching numbers, to then catching big fish, then to targeting the most elusive fish. Is there something that you've done over the course of your time in terms of a study? Is it a study?
Well, I probably do have an answer for that. It's not going to be in one or two sentences, though.
We got a whole podcast.
Yeah, well, I know. But you asked me not too long ago, Mike, what in the world, where did you get your passion for speckled trout? And I'll start off there. There's a lot of target species out there that we can go for. Some guys are hard into walleye, some into redfish, you name it about
Snook,
the fish.
tarpon.
Snook, oh gosh, heavens, yes. But here on the Texas coast, to us, a trout was a holy grail. I mean, redfish, oh yeah, you see big schools of them. They're great to catch. They're wonderful to sight cast too, but that clear water. But trout were just a little different. And I think where my passion came from trout, to be honest with you, it was just the excuse to get out there in God's creation and experience nature to the fullest that you could experience. And it gives you an excuse, and we talked about this, Chris, about for you to dive into almost every science that there is. Everything, when you're a fisherman and you try to catch these fish on purpose, you become a pretty good weatherman, a pretty good meteorologist. So you study that. And then, again, there's a lot of math involved here with statistics. And then, of course, biology, understanding, what your fish do, what your bait fish do, what the grasses do. Physics is huge. Everything from, your reel ratios to how much line you put on your reel to how wind affects current going through a cut, how heat transfers off of a winter sun-baked bank to the water, and how fish might use that. So to me, trout fishing was just the excuse to get out there and experience this wonderful creation that God gave us. And try to reap the best rewards we could out of it.
But you understand more about, and that's what we try to preach, is that, I say preach, but really identify is that targeting these fish, understanding lunar, understanding moon phase, understanding tide, understanding wind, those are the kind of intangibles actually of big trout fishing versus the actual tangibles of what you can control, which is actually making the cast and the presentation and the technique. And so that's what allures me to big trout and big trout in general. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And you are too, is that as you continue to progress and develop as an angler, when you see a 30-inch fish, that there's science, that there's an understanding of a fishery all behind that one single picture of a big fish. And so it goes back to your kind of point, which is don't catch them on purpose, right?
Go catch them on purpose. And, Captain Trish and I guided down here, not nearly as long as a lot of others, but we've got a lot of man hours out on the water. And I think what we've noticed is there are a lot of great technicians out there. Man, they can work that lure. They can make it do anything it wants to do. And they can catch these bigger fish if they're on them. But to me, the whole game is getting on them in the first place and predicting where they're going to be when. And that tells you where you need to be when. And that is going through all of these variables, like lunar, the solar deal, the weather, the barometer, the water temperature. I mean, there's so many variables to look at. And to me, the whole game is being able to call it. Okay, for example, where can I be in front of a drain when the tide first starts to drop out of a warming marsh and the moon's coming up? And it may be 100 miles away from here. Of course, we can't do that anymore. We have to stay close. But it's about being able to call your shots.
Sure.
And then when it pays off, you've done the best you could. Again, there's a lot of great technicians, but to me, there's so much more to it, is being able to pattern and find these fish and get on them when they're vulnerable. And then comes your technique, your technical, your technical part of it about putting a lure where it should be at the right speed and right depth. So, I mean, there's just a lot to this, Chris. I mean, there's a lot more than just anchoring up and chunking out and hoping something hits it.
All right, so let's chase that rabbit a little bit. Talking about those feeding windows, right? And understanding that cylinder and presentation and the technical expertise, but being able to call that, right? And so understanding those feeding windows, do you feel like those fish feed in small windows? And if they eat once, are they kind of one and done? Or when they are in that window, they're going to continue to eat until they're full, until that window closes? Are you a pretty firm believer in that theory, I guess?
Well, we definitely see different opportunities out there where fish are more vulnerable than others. And there's a lot of triggers. And yes, the sonar table, we really believe in it. We think it's critical as far as moon rise, moon overhead, moon set, moon underfoot. And we do see fish feeding more and more aggressively, but as the moon gets bigger and smaller windows. But there's so many overriding factors, such as barometer changes, temperature, sunlight, cloud cover, wind. But day in and day out, and we see deer move on the same premise. You know, we sit right here. We've got 10,000 deer here in town, and you can see the same thing. They're laying up under the trees. The cattle are laying under the trees. Nothing's going on. All of a sudden, everything's up and eating. We look over there's that big moon coming up. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one of the variables that we use. But yes, doing what we did, we're very fortunate to fish a lot of scientists and a lot of biologists, and we get to learn so much from them. And when these fish feed, well, let's say the worst thing you could do is tell your buddies, hey, man, I'm on them. Come out tomorrow. I'm on them. We whacked them today. So what happens is when these fish feed very, very hard, and larger trout, at times tend to eat larger baits. Or what they're telling us is that it takes as many calories to consume a large bait than it does to catch it. So once they get fed and full, they will sit down and digest. And I don't care what you do, they're laid up, and you are not going to catch those fish until it's time again. Now, while they're feeding, yes, we catch a bunch of big fish with a cork in its mouth and an 8-inch mullet's tail sticking out of it. They're on a roll and they're doing their deal. But we do see periods of vulnerability, and we do see a lot of down periods too. I mean, and that's all, again, part of the equation is, when are they going to eat? When are they not going to eat? And you can pattern your efforts after that. Gosh, Chris, you have opened up. You talk about a rabbit hole. This got a lot of tunnels in it, brother.
Yeah.
Again, we do rely on solar feeding periods and stuff. And my suggestion is, look at your data. What's the moon doing? When's it coming? And try to be at your highest potential spot during those periods. And that will help, but it doesn't always work, but it's certainly a variable to consider, as so are many, many others.
Yeah.
That's why we go back fishing, because you're never going to know everything.
And so, but we've somewhat seen that with the Dirty 30 data, because we do collect the date caught, right? Mm-hmm. And that date caught, we're trying to correlate that a little bit to moon phase and understanding that, and then also kind of backing up those theories. And so one of the theories and the thing that my dad's told me and growing up is the best time to catch a big trout is the week before the full moon. And kind of no other time really truly exists. That's your no kidding best time to do that. Well, over the course of the year or the 2 years that we've been collecting the data, we've seen the new moon be as productive as the full and around those moons, right? And so it goes back to, I think what we're trying to say is that there are multiple feeding windows throughout the course of a month, and those big fish responding to those windows.
Well, that's true. And what your dad's seen is true for what he's doing. And it depends on where you're fishing and what the conditions are and everything else. But the full moon stuff, I'd be honest with you, I would much rather take a new moon. And the reason I can say this is I think one thing that differentiates a couple of us apart from others is we fish for almost 20 years exclusively at night. And man, when you get out there at night, you hear everything, you see everything, you understand how much life is actually out there and what triggers them to move and what triggers, what shuts them down, excuse me. And I know there's exceptions. Some people do extremely well in a big full moon at night. Areas you got a lot of current, a lot of cover, a lot of bait, close to passes and whatnot. Get some guys doing very, but day in and out, trout are not only super predators, they're super prey. And at night, when there's a big bright full moon, it's calm. I mean, everything just goes still. And now if you got cloud cover, that's something else. But what we've seen is 5 or 6 days before a full moon going into it, we see increased activity. And we see increased I'm banging on the table again. We see increased activity. And as far as I'm concerned, unless you're just got to go, you got to go. The week after a full moon, stay home and mow the yard. I mean, they're just feeding it. They don't feed on bankers hours. They don't feed on our fishing hours, and they do something different. Now, new moon, you can get away with a lot more. They'll feed several days after that. Of course, there's other variables too. A lot of people say, well, of course, your big moons, you got bigger tides and you got better tide movement. Well, you dadgum sure don't have that back in Baffin or down here. So the tidal movement on big moons in our areas are negligible. It's just something that we don't know about. But that's where the word lunatic came from. And so seriously, in ancient religions, a lot of people have gone off of these moon phases and stuff. And back when man was much more attuned to nature, they were much more aware of that stuff. And so bringing that back into our modern life, you can actually see on things on the water happen again, even on land. Even the cattle stand up. You see nature respond to that, and you tell me the man that can explain to you why, and I'll buy him a drink somewhere. We just don't know certain things, but we chase these variables and we try to make sense out of them. But
you put the odds in your favor, right? And we've talked about this so many times. Is that there's an equation to this to some extent, right? There's physics involved. There's all these various things that go into targeting these fish. And it goes back to, I think, your main point, your opening point, which is that's why they're so elusive. That's why we're so passionate about it, because there is so much more involved into targeting big fish.
Well, it's not very difficult. I mean, for example, our base system is very, very healthy. You can go out there and catch as many dink trout as you want to, which tells you the water quality is good, the recruitment's good. But these bigger fish are under siege. And even, we just taken so many out. Every coastal environment's pretty much under siege with more user groups and more people out in the water and more harvest and everything else. But even going back on the regular gillnet studies, the fish that we're trying to chase, these big, big fish, again, 0.5% can be 29, 30 inches. And that's a different animal. And these little small, I call them dink trout, they're like little teenagers, all tennis shoes and hormones. They're going to eat all day, every day. These bigger fish are much more selective than that. They bend the route, they're in a survival mode, and they're going to come up, eat when they do, and drop back down to depths unknown. And so to me, the whole game is trying to pattern these bigger fish out, just like these deer hunters do. They're going to pattern out their massive old Boone and Crockett deer, but they have an advantage. They leave tracks. Our trout don't leave tracks. So we've got to get out there and, and put every variable to your advantage to work. And to me, that's a big part of the whole inspiration on doing this is being able to call it. And putting all these variables together. And I'm going to tell you one more time, there's a big difference between catching one of these fish on purpose and as opposed to 9-year-old Susie holding up a 9-pound trout saying, Daddy, is this a big one? Daddy, is this a big one?
But all right, so you kind of alluded to it, right? In a healthy base system, you have a bunch of dink trout. When did you start guiding down here in Port Mansfield?
Way late. I didn't start guiding until 2003 or 4, but we fished a tremendous amount of days per year for 20, 25 years before that, maybe even longer than that. But I did not start professionally guiding with Captain Trisha till about late 03, 04. And so again, I wasn't in it near as long as these other guys, like your buddy Jay Watkins that, you just interviewed Jay, and that man has been guiding professionally, I think, for 39 years. Can't touch that. There's a song about that. Can't touch this. And so he's got so much a different knowledge base, and we share stuff. But no, I did not guide all that long. But when you got 5 men in your boat, over 200 days a year, and so does Tricia. That's a lot of man hours.
Sure.
And you get to gain a lot of information and see what works and what doesn't work. And
But from that time, right, from the early times of your guiding endeavor, have you seen a change in the actual estuary and down here in the Lower Laguna?
tremendous. Well, I think it's common in most bay systems. When I first got down here, if it looked good, it probably was. And you get in there and you had a tremendous chance to catch 4 or 5 pound trout, a 6 and a kicker every now and then, if conditions are right and everything met. But we knew that they were there. And we knew that we had a chance to do it. And as the years goes on and we see much more prop wash and prop scars and, people launching and becoming very, very effective with GPSs and very effective baits, we have seen the numbers of size, how can I say this, go down.
Yeah.
And for example, right now down here, there's as many small fish you want to catch. That mid class, let's say between 21 and 25, is pretty elusive because it's kind of hard to catch the 7, 8s, and 9s, 10s when you take all the 3, 4s, and 5s out. And that's what people are doing these days.
Do you feel like method of harvest, though, has kind of contributed to that? And I'm not trying to single out like croaker soakers or anything, but I'm just saying like it's just the evolution of the angler has grown, the amount of people. And so the amount of take versus the amount of kind of giving back has kind of overarched. Well, let me rephrase that. The amount of take versus the amount of giving back has taken precedence.
Well, I'll use your word evolution of an angler. And what we've seen the last decade or decade and a half is we have a lot more efficient boats. We've got boats that go places that you shouldn't be going. Very efficient, effective. We've got extremely accurate GPSs. We have weather information. We've got a lot of baits out there, whether it's plastic or natural, that are very effective. And so what it's done in a combination of everything, it's made the angler much more effective in harvesting. And that's what most people do. I mean, when old Bubba Bill goes out there fishing, Mary at home wants a payback on that. Where's my fish?
Right.
And besides that, Aunt Betty wants some fish too. And what about the church and, and our neighbors? And so everybody's still in that big mode that I've got to bring meat home to justify my trip. We're in a different position now. We don't keep them anymore unless we're going to eat them that night or the next day. And we cut them. We didn't even think about it, but we understand. I mean, yeah, you want to bring your bounty home. We understand that. But my not my issue, but my observation is there has just become so many of us out there harvesting fish that we're seeing a difference, as far as size goes, and especially numbers of size.
And I would say it almost, we've talked a little bit about it, but it almost seems like the estuary is getting younger, right? Because there aren't as many adults, quote unquote adults, of these big size fish, but you got a lot of teenagers running around, right? And so the fact is that you just don't have what you once had from a estuary years past of those big fish. And you were sharing a story where, I mean, going out there and catching 5, 6, and 7s, that was a pretty common deal here.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's no question about it. But, and you can see it again, we have a lot more science now, a lot more data, and you can see it on the GillNet graphs. Mm-hmm. You can see a very steep incline in numbers, in size, and when they get to be 15 inches, it lays over flat and starts dropping, because once it gets to be legal size, a lot of them are being taken out. Mm-hmm. And again, that 30-inch trout does not grow, out of a baggie. Yeah. And so, and what do you do? I mean, seriously, what do you do? And you do things like what you're doing is encourage people to put more sport back into sport fishing, and
take what you need and release the rest.
And I'll be real honest with you. I think Captain Tricia had a good point. She's a gourmet cook, by the way. And she goes, "Mike, are trout really that good?" I said, "Well, yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. But what about heck, black drum's better table fare than trout. I'll take a black drum over trout any day as far as flounder, ceviche on redfish. I mean, there's so many other species out there that we could target for food. But everybody's still in that little mindset about bringing home their limits. If they did not have a successful trip unless they brought home limits of trout. And we get it. That's been going on forever. But you're talking about evolving of an angler. It's also the evolving of a whole fishery.
Yeah. Did you go through that maturation process though, of being a catch and keep kind of only guy to being a responsible steward? And was there a certain time or a certain instance that you were like, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit different in terms of my approach?
No. Oh man, there were so many times in the early years that we would absolutely catch and keep as biggest as we could. And we're going to be the heroes and go to the neighborhood, well, Susan down there, cleaned our house, and Jay Motor, so we're going to feed them. We're going to take fish to the church. We're going to go to, feed Aunt Betty over there that's in a wheelchair. And so we're coming home looking for people to give these fish away to, because there's no way we could even have the freezer space for this stuff. So, and that was our little hero status. You go to the job place, your workplace. Hey, man, I've been fishing a few days. I got 40 trout out there. And so you'd hand them out and you're the hero. It kind of reminds me of old Indian bucks bringing scalps on their belt back to the camp, and beating your chest. Look what I did. And, and over time you go, what does a man really get out of this? We can go out there and do that. But I've kind of changed from that. I will not give a grown man a fish if he is capable of going to Walmart, buying a fishing license and being able to go fishing. Now, if you're handicapped or something, we will give some fish away to, some people like that. But no, it over time it changed. Instead of killing everything you possibly could, well, that became not the focus so much anymore. But that's the evolution of angler. At first, you're going to do that, and we get it. That's Texas Parks and Wildlife set a limit, and that's what it is. If you're within that limit, you're good to go.
And I feel that that's the case, though. I mean, my dad, he was on a podcast. Obviously, Peepaw, if you're out there listening, buddy, we've talked about you a lot, but. That was the mentality. That's the household that he grew up in. And so as his son, that's kind of what he was taught, and he taught me. And then there was a time, actually it was in Port Sulphur, Louisiana. I remember the day. It was in the fall, and we went out there, and we just absolutely, you could cast wherever you wanted, and you just caught them. And we continued to catch and keep. And obviously we were within the limits. And so we went out there the next day and we did it. And so we had 100 trout, right? 50 trout per person for each of those days. And then when we got done fishing, we go home at the end of the weekend, right? And we enjoyed our time as father and son, but we had like 6-gallon bags full of fillets and looking at ourselves and like, what are we going to do with all these? And so that was at least a turning point for us to kind of look internally and go, hey, we really don't need to harvest as much. And so let's just basically take what we need and release the rest. And that's kind of what coined that phrase, at least internally to our family. And then through the course of the Speckled Truth endeavor, meeting guys like you, Jay Watkins, David Rousey, Doc J. Wright, Doc Bob White, like all these guys that we've talked to, that's the mentality they've kind of come to realize, is that taking what you need and releasing the rest is responsible stewardship of a resource.
Well, I don't know what's wrong with that, but the way Steve defines
I just feel like we've gotten away from that a little bit to some extent, fueled by social media.
Well, what's needed to define is what do you really need? What do you, if you got a big need, you got a big old family, y'all are starving, we'll keep the daggum things. We'll keep the smaller ones, but over time we started to realize how precious these bigger fish were. And you hold this big magnificent thing up there, I'm gonna cut you loose, and next time I catch you, you're gonna be an 8 or a 9 or 10. But yeah, as far as the meat thing goes, I mean, there is probably no more expensive meat in this world than a pound of speckled trout fillets when you consider your boat costs, your insurance, your fuel, and your time. And
I mean, we're sitting right here at Port Mansfield, right at the end of the canal, and watching these, $70,000, $80,000 boats going in and out of the marina. And it's, so you start factoring that, but I don't want to go all into that. The biggest thing is, over the course of your time, have you seen a shift in that fishery from I say early days, the early 2000s to now, from a big trout fishery and the rarity now of catching a 30-inch fish versus then? And have we contributed to that through the kind of harvesting instead of the responsible stewardship of taking what you need and releasing the rest?
Well, of course we have. And what's kind of amazing me now is all this new social media and all these new venues we have to get your information out. What kind of amazes me, and it's saddening, is to see all these guides especially, bragging about catching a limit of 17-inch trout. And I can tell you this right now, brother. Back in the old days, we started catching those 17, 18, 19-inch trout, even 20s. We would leave. Let's get out of these dinks. And now everybody's bragging about getting and see, now we're seeing a ratio. Even the guys with bait, we're seeing them go through 4, 5, 6 fish to get one keeper. And so again, the fishery is very healthy. They're just not allowed to grow to maturity.
Yeah.
And because again, and the only reason is because there's so many of us doing it, and so many of us have gotten so effective. Well, you're going to have an effect out on the water. You're going to see it.
Yeah.
It's just like if you go to a high fence deer ranch and kill all the 3-year-old bucks. What's going to happen? I don't know, but yes, we have a huge increase in participation out there.
Yeah.
And everybody's gotten very, very good at it. And let's remember, the old horn of plenty has a diminishing end. Okay, it really does. And so you think that the fish population is unlimited? No, it's really not.
So there was an article you wrote though, and I thought it was pretty telling. And so for those that don't know, Mike is, if you've not, and I share his articles, I've read them all, and we'll dive more into that here in a sec, but writing for Texas Saltwater Fishing Magazine for many, many years, but also writing before that. But there was an article that you wrote, it was talking about pillars of coal.
Pillars of coal. Well, our editor, God bless him, he got here as fast as he could from Pennsylvania. Everett Johnson, he's the owner operator of Texas Saltwater Fishing Magazine with his wife Pam. And I worked very close to them for all these daggum years. Well, everybody from different regions has different ways of portraying lessons. And he told me one that hit me so hard that I wrote a whole article about it. It's called Pillars of Coal. And I do think it's interesting. I think it's applicable. You still got a lot of guys today say, man, there's so many fish out there. We're whacking them. Well, the pillars of coal thing came from the old coal mining industry. And what the miners would do, they would find a vein of coal. And I mean, they would just mine it for all it's worth. I mean, well, what they would have to do is leave pillars to hold the shaft up. And when it played out, they started backing out, mining the pillars because that's all that was left. And I wrote this years ago, but I think we're seeing that. We're seeing everybody mining the pillars that are left that held the structure up, because you get these stack up situations. And I'll give you an example, like East Bay and Galveston right now, all the flood waters has pushed all the fish out to these certain reefs out there. Everybody's circling the wagons. Oh, the fishery's great.
Yeah.
Well, you're fishing a pillar.
And there's a similar situation, talking with my dad right now. I mean, fishing in Louisiana, and they went through the speckled trout stock assessment just recently. And if you would ask him, based off of his observation of this year and his catch, and he's tagging and releasing, but is based on his catch ratio, it's the highest it's ever been, considering he's tagged 12,000 trout over 4 years. So the fact that this year has been the best summer that he's had in years that he's caught and targeted all those fish. But it goes back to that kind of stack up situation where the river's been super high. They open the spillway. And so you have inundation, a flood of this fresh water, and it stacks up the salt water into kind of certain areas. And those trout have tails. And you also wrote an article about that. Trout have tails and they know how to use them. And they basically is like shooting fish in a barrel. And again, his production was super high. And one of the things he shared was that, hey, this isn't a true indication of the overall speckled trout assessment. And so we got to consider it kind of long-term instead of the same. And so it kind of gets back to the pillars of coal. If you asked one person on their production this year, they'd be like, oh man, it's amazing. But over the course of time, I would venture to say that you'd see a little bit of a diminishment in the Louisiana estuary based off of just over harvest to some extent, right? I mean, there's obviously other external factors, but here within the Texas fishery, I think there's some correlation there too.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, my gosh, we had the best year we've ever had, according to some people. Well, why is that? Well, again, there's environmental factors. Freshwater will stack every fish up with a many square miles into a certain area. So everything is there, and you think the fishing's off the hook.
Yeah.
And because, again, you've got a stack up situation. And we see that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Again, that's a pillar.
Yeah.
It's fishing a pillar.
And so in line with that, so I want everybody to understand, how long have you been writing in general?
I didn't start writing until like 99.
How long have you been writing? Was that all for Texas Saltwater Fishing Magazine?
No. I started off with the old Gulf Coast connections that Gene Baker had. And what was really cool about him, all these guys writing for him, and he didn't edit a dadgum thing. If you misspelt a word and you wrote like you had 3 teeth in your head, Ridge Runner from Arkansas or whatever, and he let that stay. And what was really cool about that was you got to learn more about the people you were reading about.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, really cool. He just let that fly. I started off with Gene. And then I went with Tom Nix, the salty angler out of Corpus, and was with him several years. And then Everett came in and we talked about it, and he decided to buy Gene Baker's Gulf Coast Connections out, and we went with that for several years. And then we switched it, put a little slick cover on it, called it Texas Saltwater Fishing Magazine. So, it was a great run. Got to meet a lot of people. Again, doing what we're doing, you get to meet all these scientists and biologists and other fishermen, and you get to share information and learn things, and pretty interactive.
Do you like to write? I know that's kind of maybe a rhetorical question, but I mean, honestly, do you have a writing background? Do you have a writing degree or anything along those lines? I mean, for me, I'm just a guy who's passionate about sharing that experience. And even though I'm from South Louisiana and that Louisiana education isn't necessarily the highest nationally, I try to string together a few sentences, which may be incoherent to most, but I'm just writing what's passionate, man, what's heartfelt. And so is that something you had, or did you have some like technical experience with writing and taken courses or got a degree in that?
Well, no, absolutely not. I mean, I used to write manuals at work and things like that, but it was technical stuff. And this is a whole different deal. Writing was very stressful for me to try to find content that was worthy of people reading and not just a regular how-to. This is how you tie a knot. Okay, we can read that anywhere. And, just normal. So it was very stressful for me trying to come up, with content that was worthy to read, that would, help the fishery, period, as far as not only fishermen, everything else. But, we talked about this. There are a lot of writers that sometimes fish, but there are a lot of fishermen that sometimes write. Well, I was a fisherman that sometimes wrote. And even though you're not that skilled, if you're out there making stories every day and you got 5 men in your boat, that many man hours, your partners, and so you see all this stuff transpire and you've got passion about what you're writing about, it kind of works itself out.
Sure.
But yeah, I tried to write when I was a kid. My first day in first grade, I turned in a short story. Matter of fact, I found that a few months ago.
Did you really?
Mean old witch teacher's name was Mrs. Dora. And she held that in front of the class, held it up like this. It said, look at this, look at this. It was about a pirate ship in a storm sinking at night. And the ship was socking. And of course, my handwriting was horrible. I misspelled every dadgum word. And she destroyed me for years after that. And I would encourage teachers these days, if somebody tries to write something, let the kids write.
But Tom Rowland asked that question, at least to me, in the podcast. Not about you, but about me. Was there a certain time that you were like, hey, I really like this writing deal? And similarly, I don't remember the teacher's name, but I remember being absolutely terrible at writing, and to a large extent, I still am, right?
No, you're a good writer.
Again, it's just passion, right, about just writing about. But there was a certain time with the same situation where it was just so horrible, she had to share it with everybody. And it's
exactly what
I want to prove her wrong. Anyway, but another article that I think is wildly popular, And whether people realize it or not, from various states is an article I want to talk a little bit more about, and it's called Beasts of Legend.
Oh, good grief. I wrote that years ago.
So tell everybody about kind of Beasts of Legend.
Well, you're going to have to kind of remind me what that was even about. And I think what fueled that article.
I'll give everybody a precursor to this. There was a cover. Well, let me phrase it. There was a picture associated with that. And so if you search for it now, you'd find the thumbnail, and everybody's seen it. And it was 3 trout skulls side by side. And one of them was, let's just, for lack of better terms, much larger than the other 2.
Well, yeah. And you get inspiration if from writing from all kind of different things. And sometimes it could be the simplest thing. And yeah, there was one day I was walking on the East Cut up there close to the Gulf. And I was walking around there, stumbling around old mud, and I saw something laying there. I said, what the heck is that thing? And walked over there, and it was a fish skull. I said, well, that looks pretty cool. That looks pretty big. So I stuck a stringer through its eyeballs and carried it around and took it home. Didn't think much about it for a couple, 3 months. And I said, how big is that skull? And it was a trout skull. And by the way, that was confirmed by some scientists. So, well, let's find out next time somebody kills a big fish, well, we'll do an experiment. So sure enough, somebody killed an almost 29. I mean, just choked it and mishandled it. So I filleted it. Well, I cut the head off and threw it on a stringer out in the harbor. And 2-3 days later, I got a skull. And this is, mind you, this is almost a 29-inch trout.
Yeah.
And so I went to go retrieve it. And I told you this, I started pulling up the stringer. Well, it was gone.
Yeah.
And I went, what? Well, that thing was so small, it was behind the float. And I couldn't see it. And went, oh, really? And let's do that again.
Yeah.
So I think I had one close to 27. We did the same thing. And to be honest, there was very, very little difference between that 27, that 29 on skull and everything. But this behemoth that I found, and I should have taken a different picture. I should have taken from the rear that showed the spinal column. The spinal column on this thing was 3 times as big as that 29. The skull itself was 3 times, but the spinal column, we have no idea what kind of beast this was. And I sent it in our scientists, biologist friends. They went, well, if those 2 are trout, that's not a trout. It's just too big. So, okay. Well, they came down here to do some research one time. So I brought them over here to them and laid them out. And they looked at each other. And little Megan, who was a biologist at that time, working with Greg Stuntz, looked at it. And she went in the bathroom and came back with a bunch of toilet paper and wrapped that big skull in toilet paper and gently put it in a box. And I haven't seen it since, but they confirmed it was a trout. So beast of legend. Yes, we all have our stories about seeing big fish. The one that got away, heaven's sake, we all have those stories. But every now and then there's some tangible evidence of that. And for this thing to be 3 times as big as a 29-inch, we have no idea what it was. But, it's just encouragement that, yes, here be dragons. There are possibly big fish out there that we want to chase. And it was pretty encouraging.
So do you think they still exist?
Well, you want to think so. I mean, you want to think so. There's stories, back in the freezes in the 50s and, where they're picking up 40-inch trout in the land cut that are dead, and biologists doing that kind of stuff, and other stories. But again, we don't have any tangible evidence of those fish, but we want to believe they exist. But here's that skull that gives you that little glimmer of hope. Little glimmer of hope that, just maybe if I do my homework and get out there and try hard enough.
And that'd be the interesting part, right? Because to know if they do exist, I mean, there's a ton of hooks in the water. There's people everywhere. You would think it's like Bigfoot, right? I mean, you'd think one of those things would show up, but then you find that, right? And then you kind of start to kind of internalize, well, where the heck do they go? What do they do? What do they eat? Do they become more... Do they eat detritus? Do they eat dead things in the bottom? Do they just kind of cower or I don't know,
Do they go nocturnal and parasitic? Are we not going to see them? Do they go places unknown? But it is kind of curious, Chris. It is kind of curious. And Mike Blackwood's state record held in Baffin for over 20 years. And Bud Rowland, what he catch at 37 on his numero uno fly. And a lot of people discount that because he didn't bring the dead carcass in, but we have a lot of mutual friends. They say he's straight up, so we can believe. But anyway, You would think, just like you said, with all the hooks in the water, in every basis there is, that somebody would beat that state record sooner, but it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So you got to wonder, do they exist? If they do, are we doing something wrong? Do we need to do something different? Is it a unicorn?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's worth the chase.
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout, as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, MirrorLure, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this will be possible. And we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion. All right, so Mike, do you have, and again, just being here with you as my fishing mentor, do you have a mentor within the fishing industry?
Now?
Yeah, or ever? Was there somebody?
Well, now right now it'd have to be Jay Watkins. I mean, that man's been out there for almost 40 years and seen every change there is, and he's just, he's the guide's guide. There's no question about it. And we talk quite a bit. He's become one of my best friends. Listen to him. I mean, Jay's the kind of guy that you get off the phone with and you just feel good. You're not really sure why, but you just feel good. You feel positive. But in the early days, Chris, I was like you. I read and consumed everything that there was to read. And this is back in the late 70s, early 80s and stuff. And early 80s, back where I was fishing the Galveston Bay system. Well, you'd read stuff from old Mickey Eastman and James Fogg throwing mirror lures in the winter in West Bay coves and then the Trinity Bay stuff. And you would, and these guys are doing stuff that you just had not done. And so you want to emulate that and try to figure out how they were doing stuff. And of course, back then we were chasing techniques and what lure to throw, which hell, you can catch them on a big pin if they're feeding. But, I did have one gentleman back in the early 80s. His name was Roland Williams. He was one of the original Trinity Bay guides. And he took me under his wing back then. And back then we were throwing, our top water back was a redfin. And he was throwing a straight back redfin. We walk Hodges and at Trinity Bay and stuff. And he knew when to be where. And this is early on. And he was one of my first ones. But no, after that, we kind of became loners. Mm-hmm. And we kind of started not really paying a lot of attention to what everybody else was doing. We just did our own thing. And again, trying to either prove or disprove what we'd read over the years. And we kind of did both of that. But everybody's got their own perspective on fishing. And so you try to learn from everybody out there who had been successful. And again, Mickey and Plog and that whole bunch, that was the gurus back in the Galveston Bay system back then.
I mean, you knew Rudy Salty Plugger.
Oh, Rudy Gagar. Oh, I didn't. I mean, yeah, we exchanged pleasantries. I'd met him. I knew him from the old Sportsman downtown, read his books and all that kind of stuff. And he actually moved pretty close to my mother-in-law outside of Toledo by Pettis, Texas. But Rudy's book's pretty interesting. But, he was fishing right after World War II. They were still, like at San Luis Pass, they were still fishing bomb craters, when they used to practice bombs back then. And of course, his book, wall to wall. But he was back and something, this will bleed into what you're doing right now. He saw 4 or 5 boats at San Luis Pass, so he got upset. So he moved to Port O'Connor, or wherever he moved, Port Lavaca. Then he got upset and then he ended up moving to Chandelier Islands because, but he was used to just tremendous amounts of fish. He fished a lot at night, fished a lot in the winter at night. He was an animal. But what I thought was very interesting about Rudy the Plugger Gagar, and he even says in his book, his whole entire fishing career. And we're talking about just after plastics became popular after World War II in the 50s and 60s, he had only caught 3 trout over 10 pounds.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Now, I know, and that's why I want your Dirty 30 boys to understand how precious that fish is that you caught. And here is the guy that's fishing back then when there was no other traffic. Environment was
a pretty
natural.
virgin system.
Pretty much.
Extent, yeah.
And he caught 3 trout over 10 pounds in his whole career.
That's crazy.
And so that should tell us something. And I hear guys say, yeah, I've caught 260 trout over 30 inches. No, you hadn't. No, you haven't.
So that begs the question. I mean, what's the biggest trout you ever caught?
Man, I don't know. A lot of people ask me that, and I don't know, because back in the old days, I got in on the tail end of this, on the very, very tail end where you measured fish on how many ice chests that you filled up. And we would go, my heavens, look at that. Looks like an alligator. And we didn't have boga grips. We didn't have check-it sticks. We didn't care. But as far as just measuring a fish, no, mine's not that big. I got a 32 and a half, several 30s and stuff, but I don't have any 12, 13 pound fish. And, that's just such a rare deal. But what was that question you asked me a while ago about?
Mentor?
Well, about mentoring and everything, but about measuring fish and.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we require in a Dirty 30 program is an actual measurement of a fish to validate, basically, and kind of set the standard and enforce a standard, right? But also, there's a lot of claims to 30-inch fish, but when you can actually throw it out there and actually see, no kidding, on a ruler or a check-it stick or whatever, that the fish is indeed 30 inches, again, how rare that actually is. And so this year alone, we have, I think there's 87 Dirty 30 entries. Last year was 59. And we hope to. That's
pretty big.
But you got to consider, though, this is 9 states. This isn't just Texas. Now, Texas dominates the list, but you're also considering there are a lot of hooks, a lot of anglers from Port Isabel all the way up to Chesapeake Bay, right? And there is a lot of people in between. And I know we don't reach all those people with Speckled Truth, but on the same token is the 3.3 million people that we do reach, there's a lot of hooks in the water.
You're reaching 3.3 million people, and I'm sitting here talking to you with that kind of stress. Are you kidding me? Good grief.
Fortunately, yes, sir.
Well, let's go back to the evolution of an angler, okay, and how you measure things. And let me start off by saying, we have the CCA Star Tournament here, sure. And you turn in, it's got minimums, 8 pound minimum, whatnot.
Right.
And we see so many 6 pound fish come in, they think it's a 30 incher. And so we see a lot of embellishment going on. Either people just don't know any better or they're not capable of measuring. But, if you're a guide and you're promoting yourself, you're going to want to promote that fish. You're going to hold it up for pictures. You're going to put it this way and that way and put your sponsor's lure in its mouth. And You're going to do this when you got the right hat on, the right shirt
Angle.
on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and everything. And so you're really going to want to promote that big fish that you caught. But I can tell you, for example, Jay Watkins. One of the first times I had him down here, Jay, you got to come. You got to come, man. So we're running along the shoreline over there, and we are burning over so many 2 to 4 pound trout. It's ridiculous. Just ridiculous. And Jay's going, stop. Wait, you know how Jay talks? He's like, McBride, you got to stop. Look at the fish right here. Well, I said, no, Jay, those are not the ones we're looking for. What do you mean? And so we kept going, and sure enough, I found a color change in front of a little backwater area. And we got out, and he's throwing his coveted bass assassin. He's definitely production oriented. I'm kind of different. I want to catch him how I want to catch him. Mm-hmm. If you want to eat my top water, well, I guess what? I'll go bowling. But he's going to throw what he's confident in doing. So we're sitting there catching 6 pound fish and look at each other kind of laughing and throwing them over our shoulder. And, just kind of like, non-event type of deal. Well, then I hear him yelling down there, McBride, I got a toad. And he's over there, woo, 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 woo. And I said, well, that looks pretty good, Jay. And so I walk up there, and he's got a 10.5 pound trout on. And we looked at it and everything, and he held up a little bit. He wouldn't even let me take a picture of it. It's kind of like, let's pitch it back and see what else is out here. Yeah. So you don't need that as you evolve as an angler, and you just don't need that kind of validation anymore. You don't need the public or, your friends to tell you. You just don't need that anymore. Seriously, he wouldn't even let me take a picture of it.
Yeah. But that goes back to you guys being conservation minded, right? I mean, the fact that, there's no real picture. There's no ego involved, right? And that's like the antithesis of today, right? Where ego is such a big part. And it's not everybody. I'm not trying to say, look, I'm talking about this, and honestly, I'm pointing the finger right back at myself, right? So don't anybody take offense. This is me. This is maybe a self-reflection of myself, but it goes back to and that's why you guys are legends, man. And it's a result of that. I know.
Oh, give that a break.
You're going to poke me in the eyes here, but it's just, thanks for sharing that story, because it goes to show that, those fish are incredibly rare, but it goes to show that your approach and in your mindset to a fish and to a fishery of taking care of it, of just releasing it, man, and then going back and doing it again, and not bolstering the accolades based off, hey, I caught 259 30-inch fish over the course of my career. It's really irrelevant to you guys. It's really about a no kidding relationship you have with the fish itself, right?
Well, can I speak to that a little bit? In my honest opinion, which doesn't really count for much, but I think the more novice a fisherman is, the bigger his ego is. And look what I did. And as you mature into this sport endeavor, whatever you want to call it, you start realizing how small you're out there in the cosmos. And we were not conservation oriented at all. And until we started seeing how precious these bigger fish really were, and we started, we need to kind of take care of this a little bit. But as you mature into the process to catch these bigger fish, you realize seriously what a small piece of sand you are in this whole cosmos. So you get more humble. So instead of your ego increasing, your humility increases, because you realize that, what a great gift it was to even be able to do that in the first place. And, strutting around and, putting these big fish up for promotional pictures and everything. That's fine. That's cool. Y'all do it. But it gets to be a point where it's secondary. It's secondary. It's between you and the creator and the nature.
One of the things about it is that, the reason we have all the pro staff and the promotional deals is because we have a fishery. And if we don't take care of that public resource and take care of that fishery, it doesn't exist, right? They kind of go and they have to go hand in hand.
Well, I think that you'll find, Chris, that most of your higher end players, most of your better sponsors are very conservation oriented, and they know that it's a limited resource, and, you have to take care of it, and it goes back to business. Otherwise, if you don't have fishery, you don't have a business.
Yep.
And so they're interested, in preserving the fishery. And we've got a lot of great people out there. I'm not going to name any names, but if you look seriously, the better part of them are concerned with a fishery continuing, that we can continue to enjoy and have hopes of catching better fish. If you just take them all out, well, again, let's go bowling.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit, Mike, because I've known you now for, I can't believe it, 7 years. 7 years. I can't believe that. Anyway, but one of the things that
really,
I know, it's been 7 years if you think about it. Anyway, one of the things that you mentioned, you've written about it a couple of times. I've even tried to talk about it because it resonates with me, and it will hopefully resonate with everybody listening here. And that is, you're saying it's not the arrow, it's the Indian.
Well, that's true. I give people grief all the time. It ain't the arrow, it's the Indian. And it really is. It's about, and you're talking about techniques and certain lures and certain colors in this. Oh heavens! I could catch him if I had a big pin with hooks on them, and you in the right place, at the right time, put the right depth. You're going to catch these fish. And so it's not so much. And I'm sorry, sponsors, but it's a lot more to that. There's a guy down here. He's been down here forever and ever and ever. And I'll give him an example. I don't know him, but I know of him. His name is Gilbert Vela, and he's down in South Padre. And in the old days, and people have copied him since, he would do a little on the water seminar. He would nose rig a jalapeno and work it like a topwater and just slam these fish. And
Trout?
Everything. Well, mostly reds, but trout too. And then he would take a bare hook and put a house key on it and go out there and cast those grass beds and catch trout. And he's just trying to show people that, hey, there's a little more to this than just what you're buying off the rack. And it ain't the arrow, it's the Indian. Yeah, to me, it's about profile, depth, speed.
And that kind of gets back to our original discussion, which was understanding all the other variables and how important those play in. And in lure and technique is really almost tertiary to some extent, right?
Did you say tertiary? Okay, let me go get my dictionary.
That was about the largest word I could think of, especially being from South Louisiana. So that's the extent of the large words that I'll use. But anyway, but no, it's just my point is like understanding all these other variables are way, I think, more important than actually making the presentation, using certain technique, and then catching the fish. But that is a part of it. But I want to kind of segue into what I call, and it kind of wraps up the show before your parting shot, and that is kind of 3 quick fire questions. And they're kind of generally more fishing related and more specific to that. But
Chris, we haven't even talked about fishing yet. And if you want to go there, that's fine. I think this is supposed to be a fishing show. Maybe we can accommodate that a little bit.
I think we talked a little bit about that. But so one of the questions I've asked, and it's a pretty static question, is if you had one lure, what would you throw?
If I had one lure,
what would it be?
What would I throw? Well, I can tell you that if I was on Naked and Afraid, I could do without the naked part, but what people do in that thing is pretty interesting. If I had to have one lure to throw to survive off of, it would probably be and I don't throw them at all now, but I'll probably drop all the way back to a silver spoon. And I'll tell you why, because you can cast it a mile. You can put it anywhere you need to put it. You can do so many things with it. It's just a primordial instinctive thing to hit a flash. Mm-hmm. I like to throw other things, no doubt about it, but just survival, or if I had to go catch fish, it would be something as simple as that.
So if you had all right, let me question 1A is if you had to go target trophy, if you needed one lure to go target trophy trout, what would it be?
Well, I told you in the very beginning that almost every question you're going to ask me is going to end up with "it depends." I don't think there's an absolute answer to that. You're not going to buy your skill off the rack, and you're not going to say, because I mean, there's been, as you call trophy trout. I'm not really hot on that term,
okay, but
as you call big trout and stuff, they have been caught on everything imaginable. And so it's more, now there are certain lures out there that I am able to put it where it needs to be with the correct profile, at the right speed and depth, that are easier to do. Mm-hmm. I never was much of a soft plastic guy. Now, Captain Trish is a paddle tail queen. I mean, that's what she's confident in, and she can put it anywhere, do what she wants to do with it. But I never, like in the old days, I think we had Boone tout tail, and we had a Mr. Twister sassy shad that was a big paddle tail. And we used that, but once we started getting into red fins and mirror lures, and all of a sudden the jumping minnow came out, well, we never looked back. So I've always been a plugger type guy. That's my wheelhouse. But if I had one lure to throw for trophy trout,
I gotcha.
Well, it'd have to be two of them.
Okay.
Either something that floated or something that sank. And right now, it's just going to be a topwater of some kind, either big, little, or large, depending on your conditions, or something that sinks. And I'm going to have to go to a corky, because a fat boy, I can do so many things with it, and it's so versatile. I can put it anywhere I want to put it, fish it how I want to put it. But now that stinking little Jay Watkins and him and Lowell and Eric Botnick with Mirror had that double D coming out.
Oh man,
it's basically a fat boy that floats. You can pull it down and do stuff with. I'm really looking forward to catching a lot of big fish on this winter. But something, it all goes back on my personal preferences. I want to catch fish how I want to catch them. And I'm sure there's a lot of things I can throw that catch more fish than I do. But again, I want to make them eat what I want. I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah, but maybe it's a pride thing, or maybe it goes back to, right, there's
I don't know if it's a pride thing. I think it's a challenge thing.
Yeah, challenge thing. Yeah, and that's perfect because you go from wanting to catch them, right, and then presenting whatever they're eating, and then that kind of next level is, no kidding, making them eat truly what they don't want to eat, which then goes back to angling. I wouldn't say experience, but experience of being able to work a lure a certain way to trigger some sort of response from a fish that totally doesn't want to play, right?
Well, I'll get in there where I think they are, and I'll throw something that I will try to make them want to eat it. And again, I mean, you go out there with probably a beer pop top with a hook on it. If you put it in the right place at the right time, they're going to hit it. So that's all subjective, and everybody has their favorite lures, and they got their favorite stuff, how they want to catch. There's a lot of loyalty out there to certain lures, and a lot of them work very, very, very well. It's all down to a personal preference. But to me, the bigger part of this equation is knowing when to be where and what they're doing. After you get in there and you're on these fish and they're vulnerable, there's a lot of things you can do to catch them. I just have a personal preference. This is how I want to catch them, which is, go completely against what other people want to do. But that's another beauty about fishing. It's a personal thing. You can do whatever you want to do.
And I think that's why you hate when I say trophy, if I've heard you right, because everybody's definition of trophy is different.
Well, right now, a bunch of these people down here think anything over 17-inch trout's a trophy. Look what we did. We caught a limit of fish between 17 and 19. Well, okay, good for y'all. To me, what is a trophy? And again,
well, I think to most people, it's bettering their personal best, or PB, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's a 23-inch trout and you catch a 24,
mm-hmm.
to you, that's a trophy, right? You've increased, you've bettered your production in terms of size and quality, and that might be something that they've tried to do on purpose, and that just means more. Or it could be a guy out there trying to catch like me. I mean, I don't really have a definition of trophy. The 30-inch fish I caught the other day with my son, of course, it's a 30-inch fish, but the trophy component to that was being with my son and the experience and the size and quality of fish.
There you go.
And his vision and his excitement for me and for him, and to kind of share that notionally. That's what I defined it. That was a true trophy. That thing only weighed 7.28 pounds. And again, it's 30 inches, and that's a fish of a lifetime, no doubt. But it just meant more because of the situation.
Well, there you go. And a lot of this, as far as a trophy, or let's change trophy to a memory, has to do with the conditions called it. Man, we were there right before that norther hit. We could feel the barometer change. The wind started kicking up. We saw the mullet flash, and all of a sudden we've been catching these small fish. Here's this big one. And so it's about, prolonged memories and stuff. A trophy fish is very hard to measure. Some days in fishing, a 20-inch trout is a trophy.
Yeah.
So it's all relative to what's been going on, what your personal best is. And so there's no measurement on that.
So I think that's why if I know you well enough, that's why you don't like the word trophy, is because it's so relative, right? And so subjective.
It is very subjective. And
so, all right. So in line with the lure, do you have color preferences, or is there a certain color that you like to throw?
Yes and no.
It depends.
It depends. And that is my answer, and I'm sticking to it. It depends. My heavens, there's the color spectrum on these lures is just insane. We really don't know what they see. And if you look at scientific data and drop these colors down in the water, the red's the first one to go. It's like a red snapper, for example, down at depth, it's gray. And so these colors change at depth. We don't know what they see. I mean, have you ever seen a bubblegum pink mullet? So to me, color is all dependent on conditions. Can they see it, or is it too much? In other words, does it spook them off, or can they see enough in muddier water? But I tend to stick to really basic stuff. Like on a corky, for example, I hate to tell you guys this, but I don't need much more than a pearl with a chartreuse back on it. And that white just kind of show it does it great in clear water, murky water, and muddy water. It's profile. And on a top water, oh, good grief. Yeah, there's all this talk about flash and this and that. Oh, you got to, Okay, let me tell you boys one thing right now. You night fishermen, you've got to throw black at night. That's the biggest bunch of corn bull I think I've ever heard in my life. If you're a fish and you're looking up at night, everything looks dark. It's a silhouette. You don't need to throw black. We caught some of our better fish at night in the early years off an old jumping minute. It was called dadgummit, what's that name? It was a reflective deal.
Is it like a clear?
No.
Okay.
No. I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it had a real reflective surface. And we've done extremely well at night with chrome. Just moonlight reflect on it. But you don't need to. So color is, to me, that's secondary from a lot of things. And I'll just go to basics. If it's dirty, muddy water, I'll throw something dark, either a plum chartreuse, which is probably what I'm going to throw, or a black. Or if it's clear water, you back it way off.
Yeah.
But as far as having a wheelbarrow full of baits out there for a day, no, I'm going to stick to baits. Something dark, something light, something big, something little, and be done with it.
Cool.
So really, I'm not that big of a color fanatic. I know that as fishermen, a lot of times we're more lure collectors than we are lure users. It's great. Yeah. Look at my stash. Okay, well, when it comes down to push, come shove, what are you throwing?
Yeah.
Cool.
So, thank you. Thank you for that. I've only asked you 2, and I wanted to just keep it at 2 because that's a lot of valuable information. I know we're butting up against time. I know you got some things to do, and we talked a lot about fishing, a lot about conservation, and I just want to say thanks, Mike, for letting me be here, for letting me be your friend, for mentoring me throughout the course of my time. And what I always do and try to do, especially with you guys, is kind of give you a parting shot, right? If as you talk to the listeners out there, what's something that you want to kind of leave them with as we leave this podcast? So over to you, sir, for your parting shot.
A parting shot. That sounds like I'm going to get wounded. Good heavens. I don't know. But Chris, we didn't talk about hardly anything on this. We just kind of through the wind back and forth. We didn't talk about much. We didn't talk about anything about techniques or about this or about that. And it's just kind of a general fishing discussion. But I appreciate you coming down. I especially appreciate what you're doing. And so do a lot of us about, again, recruiting new anglers to appreciate more what we have out there instead of doing what everybody's done in the years. And the only appreciation you really had for fishing was how much meat you brought home during the day, which is fine, but there's so much more to it than that.
Sure.
And what I do want your participants, again, I brought this up, is to understand on how absolutely special and precious that 30 fish is. Again, just on pure statistics on how rare they are. And when you start catching them on purpose, now you're gone from a fisherman to an angler. And that's just really cool stuff. And you're promoting that. Again, you're getting a lot of traction. And we need somebody like you, and we have not had that. And so, whatever we can do to help, wish you the best of luck in the world. Maybe you and Peepaw can come down this winter and we can try to put some of this to practice.
Let's do it. But I will say this, right? Our podcast, the long-term goal is for this to be long-standing, right? And so even though we may have not gotten into the technique, right, or to the other things that more fishing, quote unquote, fishing related in terms of targeting a fish or that.
Are you talking about how-to stuff? I despise how-to stuff.
No, I'm not saying how-to.
Everybody
I'm talking
has
about
their own.
your theory, right, and your approach to things. It's different, but we want this to be a long-standing thing. And so honestly, I'd love to have you on again, and we can talk more about that. That'd be amazing. So if you're up to it, we'd love to have you on the podcast again and continue the dialogue, right?
Well, maybe next time I'll have something to talk about.
Well, let's do this. Let's do this, right? So as this is September, the end of September, going into October, we haven't had a cool snap yet. And as we start to kind of dust off the Sims waders and we start to kind of fix some pinholes here and there and waiting, anticipating our cool snap and our cool season, let's go ahead and get out there, man. And let's go ahead and start kind of making those memories, if you will, and talk about them, right?
Well, how about this? December was one of my favorite months to fish.
Okay.
It really is. The water's cool down. The weather is clement. You have, 10 or so days between northers. The weather is awesome. The fish are already staged where they should be. And we think, well, that's a whole different subject. We think a lot of that's photo period, not temperature. They know to be where they're supposed to be.
Interesting.
So December, there's not many people here. It's just beautiful weather. We can catch. So why don't we do this? Why don't we talk about December?
Okay.
Y'all coming down. And after we fish, then we'll sit down when we're a little bit more inspired than sitting up here in a stuffy old condo looking out the window at water. And it'd be a lot better if we could record this on the water.
I know. We need Wi-Fi. We need Wi-Fi, Mike. So that's the unfortunate reality about it. But I do agree. Let's, if you're up to it, Peepaw, I'll get with Peepaw, man. We'll get him down here. He's 73 years old. And man, that guy can wade with the best of them, bad hip and all, or replaced hip and all. But yeah, if you're cool with that, I'd love to come back in December and let's do it again.
Well, again, I think it's a prime time to do it. You've got a little transition. I hate that word transition, by the way. Everything's a transition, but you got a little period there where there's not that many people here, and we're going into winter, and everything is set, and you don't have all this boat traffic, and the fish are just there waiting for you, and it's very pleasant. Okay,
let's do it. Awesome, woohoo! So, well, thanks again, Mike. Hey, I really appreciate it, and for everybody listening out there. Thanks for staying with us throughout the entire discussion. We appreciate your support for Speckled Truth and Speckled Truth Podcast. Again, none of this happens without the support of our sponsors from Mirror Lure, Texas Custom Lures, and the Original Custom Corky. Without your support, none of this is possible. So thanks again to them. We hope to see you next time here at the Speckled Truth Podcast. And we always want to leave you with this one tidbit. Always remember to take what you need and release the rest. God bless.